The millionaire arrived home early and overheard his wife calling his paraplegic stepson dead weight. From that moment on, he realized he was sleeping next to someone who despised everything he held most dear. A forgotten letter revealed the secrets of a sordid past and a brother who should never have been erased from the family. Faced with so many lies, he chose the truth and decided to rebuild everything from scratch, no matter the cost. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The sun was setting over the Upper East Side, a prestigious neighborhood in New York City, when Arthur Vance's black Porsche passed through the mansion gates. The businessman, owner of one of the country's largest construction firms, checked his watch, 5:35 p.m. He rarely returned home before 10 at night, but an unexpected call from the legal department had cancelled his meeting with foreign investors. Arthur observed the imposing facade of the residence as the automated system opened the garage. Built by him 5 years ago, the 3-story mansion was a symbol of his success. But since the accident that had claimed his first wife, Beatrice, those walls seemed to house more ghosts than joys. "Mr. Vance, what a surprise!" exclaimed Robert, the butler, as Arthur entered through the back door, preferring not to announce his arrival. "Meeting cancelled, Robert. Any problems here?" The butler hesitated, looking nervously down the hallway. "No, sir. Everything is as quiet as always." Arthur immediately noticed the tension on the employee's face. After 20 years of working together, he knew every expression of that discreet man. "Where is Peter?" he asked, referring to his 12-year-old son. "The young master is in the study with Mrs. Olson." Arthur nodded. Nancy Olson had worked in the house longer than any other employee. She had been Peter's nanny since his birth, and, after the accident that had left the boy paraplegic 2 years earlier, she had become practically his second mother. As he climbed the stairs silently, raised voices echoed down the hall. Instinctively, Arthur slowed his steps. "How many times do I have to repeat it? He has to learn to manage on his own." The sharp voice of Fiona, his current wife, reverberated off the walls. "You're raising a spoiled invalid." "With all due respect, ma'am, the boy is still adjusting. It's only been 2 years since—" 2 years is more than enough time. My husband may not see it, but that boy manipulates all of you with that wheelchair." Arthur felt his blood run cold. He stopped before turning the corner, keeping himself hidden. "Mrs. Fiona, I ask you to moderate your words. Peter is just a child, who lost his mother and is still adapting to his new condition. Don't tell me how to treat my stepson, you maid. Remember your place in this house." Arthur moved to the ajar door, and the scene he witnessed left him paralyzed. Peter, sitting in his wheelchair, cowered while Nancy, a 60-year-old woman, stood protectively in front of him. Fiona, elegant in her designer outfit, was pointing an accusatory finger at both of them. "What is going on here?" Arthur's stern voice made the three of them turn, surprised. "Darling," Fiona exclaimed, her posture changing in an instant. "I didn't know you'd be back early. We were just—" Her calculating eyes searched for an escape. "We were discussing Peter's physical therapy routine. Nancy insists on accompanying him, but I think he's old enough to develop more independence." Arthur looked at his son, who kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew that expression, the same one Beatrice made when she wanted to hide something that hurt her. "Peter, son, is everything all right?" The boy remained silent, just nodding his head slightly. "Nancy, could you give us a moment? I'd like to talk to my wife alone." The housekeeper hesitated, looking worriedly at Peter. "You can take my son to his room, please," Arthur added. "I'll talk to him later." After Nancy left, pushing Peter's wheelchair, Arthur closed the door and faced Fiona. "What really happened here?" "I already told you, dear. We were just—" "Don't lie to me, Fiona." His voice was calm but firm. "I heard enough before I came in." The woman's perfectly made-up face transformed. Her eyes, once sweet and submissive, took on a cold glint. "Do you really want to know? I'm tired of everyone treating this boy like an untouchable prince. This house revolves around him and that wheelchair. Nancy smothers him with excessive care. The staff treats him like he's made of glass, and you—" She paused, measuring her words. You work yourself to death to compensate for your absence with expensive gifts and treatments that cost a fortune. Arthur felt a pang in his chest. There was truth in those words, however painful they were. Peter lost his mother and the movement in his legs on the same day, Fiona. He needs support, not pressure. He needs limits, discipline, not this glass bubble you've all created. Fiona approached, softening her tone. Darling, I understand your guilt. You were driving when the accident happened, but you can't make up for it by turning Peter into an eternal dependent. The mention of the accident made Arthur recoil, as if he had been slapped. He had never forgiven himself for being behind the wheel on that rainy night when a truck swerved into their lane. Beatrice died instantly, while Peter survived, but lost movement below the waist. This subject is closed for today, he declared coldly. I'm going to talk to my son. As he left, he didn't see the calculating look Fiona cast at his back. Nor did he realize that the argument had been just the tip of the iceberg of a situation that had been fermenting for months in that house. In Peter's room, he found the boy sitting by the window, watching the garden where he used to run and play. Nancy was silently organizing his schoolbooks. Nancy, could you give us a moment? The housekeeper nodded, but before leaving she gently touched Peter's shoulder, a simple gesture but one laden with affection. Son, Arthur pulled up a chair, sitting at the boy's eye level. I want you to tell me what really happens when I'm not home. Peter hesitated, his brown eyes, so much like Beatrice's, drifting back to the window. Nothing much, Dad. Fiona just wants to help me be more independent. Peter, look at me. Arthur gently held his son's chin. Your mother never accepted lies, remember? Not even the small ones, the ones we tell to protect others. A silent tear rolled down the boy's face. I don't want to cause trouble. I know you like her. Nothing is more important to me than you, son. Nothing. Something broke inside Peter. Like a dam finally giving way, the words began to flow between sobs. She says I'm a burden, that you only married her because you needed someone to take care of the house and me. When you're not here, she barely talks to me. Sometimes she forgets to call me for dinner. Last week she cancelled my physical therapy because she needed the driver to go to the mall. Each word was like a knife in Arthur's chest. How had he not noticed? She hates it when Mrs. Olsen helps me. She says the maid shouldn't meddle in the upbringing she wants to give me. Yesterday, Peter hesitated, his hands trembling. Yesterday she said that if it weren't for me, you two would be traveling the world, enjoying life instead of being tied to a... He swallowed hard. To a cripple. Arthur felt a cold fury course through his veins. Never in his entire life had he felt such a desire to confront someone. How long has this been happening? It started right after the wedding. At first it was just comments when we were alone. Then it got worse. 6 months. 6 months of silent suffering, while he, blinded by the need to rebuild a family, for Peter ignored the signs. Why didn't you tell me before? Peter lowered his head. She said that if I told you, you wouldn't believe me, that you needed her because you're lonely and sad since the accident. I didn't want you to be sadder because of me. Arthur hugged his son tightly, trying to hold back his own tears. How had he failed so brutally with the most important person in his life? This ends today, Peter. I promise you. At that moment, Nancy knocked softly on the door. Her usually serene face showed evident signs of worry. Excuse me, Mr. Arthur. I think the time has come to reveal something I promised to keep until it was absolutely necessary. Arthur looked intrigued at the housekeeper who had served his family for so many years. What are you talking about, Nancy? About the letter Mrs. Beatrice left before the accident. She asked me to deliver it only when you were ready to hear certain truths. Peter's eyes widened. A letter from Mom. Arthur felt his heart skip a beat. At that moment, he didn't know that his life was about to change completely. What secrets had his late wife entrusted to Nancy? And why had she chosen this moment to reveal them? Night fell over the Vance mansion as a storm brewed on the New York City horizon. Arthur felt as if he were in the eye of a hurricane, the moment of false calm before everything fell apart. What letter is this, Nancy? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady in front of his son. The housekeeper adjusted her apron, a nervous gesture Arthur recognized from difficult situations over the years. "It would be better to talk in private, sir." "No," Peter interrupted, grabbing his father's hand. "I want to know too. It was my mother." Arthur hesitated, torn between protecting his son and respecting his right to know the truth. He looked at Nancy, who nodded discreetly. "I'll get the box," she said, leaving the room. In the hallway, Fiona watched the movement with calculating eyes. When Nancy passed her on the way to the service area, she followed her stealthily. "What do you think you're doing, you meddling old woman?" Fiona's voice cut through the air like a razor when they reached the small pantry where Nancy kept her personal belongings. "Fulfilling a promise, Ma'am?" The housekeeper was not intimidated as she opened a small locked chest. "Something I should have done a long time ago." "Do you really think you're going to destroy everything I've built in this house?" Fiona approached threateningly. "It took me months to win over Arthur. You're not going to ruin it with stories from the dead wife." Nancy stood up, holding a carved wooden box. Her 60 years of life had taught her to recognize people like Fiona, beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. "You'll never understand, ma'am, but there are things more important than money and social standing. There are promises that cannot be broken." Before Fiona could react, Robert, the butler, appeared at the door. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Olson?" The butler's presence made Fiona back down, forcing an artificial smile. "None at all, Robert. Just checking on the dinner preparations." When they returned to Peter's room, Fiona was nowhere in sight. Nancy handed the box to Arthur with slightly trembling hands. "Mrs. Beatrice gave me this a week before the accident. She said she had discovered something that would change everything, but she wanted to gather more information before talking to you. She asked me to keep it and only deliver it when I felt that you and Peter truly needed to know." The rosewood box had the monogram BV carved on the lid. Beatrice Vance. Arthur felt a lump in his throat as he opened it. Inside he found documents, old photos, and a sealed envelope with his name written in Beatrice's elegant handwriting. "May I?" Peter asked, reaching for one of the photographs. It was a faded image, 2 smiling boys, one about 8 years old and the other smaller, perhaps 5. They were in front of a simple house in the countryside. "Is that me?" Peter asked, confused. "No, son." Arthur took the photo, feeling a strange tremor in his hands. "This is me, more than 30 years ago." "And who's the other boy?" Arthur frowned, trying to retrieve long-buried memories. "I believe that's your Uncle Matthew." "I have an uncle?" Peter's face lit up with genuine surprise. Arthur hesitated. "We had little contact. He went to live with relatives in the country when he was a child. Our father said it would be better for him because of his studies." Something in Nancy's expression indicated there was more to the story. "The letter will explain it better," she said softly. With hesitant fingers, Arthur opened the envelope. The last message from his wife, kept for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. "Do you want me to read it, Dad?" Peter offered, sensing his father's difficulty. Arthur took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "My beloved Arthur, if you are reading this, it means Nancy has fulfilled her promise and realized the right time has come. I have discovered something that will change our family forever, something you need to know. It began when I was researching treatments for motor disabilities after Dr. Mendez's multiple sclerosis diagnosis. I found a specialist in New Orleans who was developing promising studies, Dr. Matthew Vance. The surname immediately caught my attention. When I showed you his picture, you said you didn't recognize him, that your brother had gone to live with relatives in the country as a child. But something bothered me about that story. Why did you never speak of him? Why did you never try to contact him? I hired an investigator, and the truth I discovered broke my heart. Matthew didn't go to live with relatives. He was abandoned in an orphanage in Newark when he was only 5 years old. Your father, pressured by your mother, made that decision because they discovered he had dyslexia and learning difficulties, something that, according to them, would tarnish the Vance family's reputation and their emerging business. You were only 8, Arthur. You were a child and had no say in the decision, but you grew up believing the lie your parents told, that Matthew was being well cared for by relatives in the country. You are not to blame." Arthur stopped reading, his face pale. Fragmented memories began to surface. A distant cry in the night, a closed door whispered promises that his little brother would come back one day when he was better. This can't be true," he murmured. Nancy touched his shoulder gently. "Mrs. Beatrice checked everything thoroughly, sir. She even found the orphanage records." With trembling hands, Arthur continued reading. Matthew grew up in the orphanage until he was 18. He was never adopted. He worked as a bricklayer's assistant, then as a nursing assistant. He studied at night with difficulty but with incredible determination. He managed to get a scholarship and, surpassing all expectations, graduated as a doctor. He specialized in motor rehabilitation precisely because of his own difficulty, a way of proving that limitations do not define a person's worth. The most extraordinary thing, Arthur, is that Matthew never stopped looking for you. In the orphanage records, there were dozens of requests from him asking for information about the Vance family. When he finally discovered who his brother was, the famous businessman Arthur Vance, he didn't seek immediate contact. He believed you had participated in the decision to abandon him. I gathered my courage and went to meet him in person in New Orleans. I didn't reveal who I was at first. I made an appointment as a patient. He is an extraordinary man, Arthur. Kind, dedicated, brilliant in his field. On the walls of his modest office, there are photos of children he helped to regain movement, to have hope. In our third meeting, I revealed the truth. I explained that you never knew what really happened, that you grew up believing your parents' lie. I saw his eyes well up with tears when I showed him pictures of you with Peter. He has a simple life in New Orleans. He runs a small rehabilitation clinic for underprivileged children. He never married, but he adopted a girl with cerebral palsy, Sophia, your niece you never knew existed. I am convinced that you two need to reunite. This separation was based on prejudice and lies. Our Peter needs to know this extraordinary uncle who turned his own difficulty into a strength to help others. I plan to tell you all this in person, preparing you gradually. But if you are reading this letter, something prevented me. I trust Nancy's judgment about the right time to reveal this truth. Arthur, you have always been a fair man, even if sometimes too distant, absorbed by work. I know you will do the right thing. Find your brother. Heal this family wound. Show Peter that blood ties are important, but ties of love and respect are even more so. Forever yours, Beatrice. A heavy silence filled the room when Arthur finished reading. Peter was the first to break it. So I have a doctor uncle in New Orleans and a cousin? The youthful enthusiasm contrasted with his father's devastated expression. Mr. Arthur, Nancy spoke softly, there are more documents in the box. Mrs. Beatrice gathered everything. Address, phone number, articles published by Dr. Matthew. Arthur examined the papers with trembling hands. Among them he found a recent photo, a middle-aged man, graying at the temples, in a white coat, next to a teenage girl in a wheelchair. Both were smiling at the camera, their eyes, the same Vance eyes, shining with genuine joy. He looks like Grandpa, Peter observed, looking at the photograph. At that moment, the door opened abruptly. Fiona entered, her face a mask of false concern. What is going on here? Robert said you brought in a mysterious box and everyone is upset. Arthur stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Every line of her perfectly made-up face, every studied gesture, every calculated word, it all seemed false now. Fiona, I need you to leave us alone. But darling, I'm your wife. If there's a family problem, now. The firmness in Arthur's voice left no room for argument. When the door closed, Arthur turned to Nancy. Why did you wait so long? The housekeeper sighed deeply. At first you were devastated by the loss of Mrs. Beatrice and worried about Peter's recovery. Then you seemed to be rebuilding your life, finding a path. But when Fiona started to show her true nature with the boy, she shook her head. I realized it was time to remember the true meaning of family. Peter held the photo of his uncle and cousin with fascination. Can we visit them, Dad? Please?" Arthur felt something awaken inside him, a determination he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps not since childhood, when he secretly promised himself he would find his missing brother. "Yes, Peter. We're going to New Orleans." "And what about Fiona?" Nancy asked, her concern evident in her voice. Arthur carefully placed the documents back in the wooden box. "One thing at a time. First, I need to meet my brother and understand this story completely. Then—" his gaze hardened. "Then we'll deal with the situation with Fiona." What Arthur didn't know was that in the hallway, Fiona was pressing her ear against the door, catching fragments of the conversation. Her carefully constructed empire was threatening to crumble, and she wouldn't surrender the privileges she had gained by marrying one of New York's wealthiest businessmen without a fight. As the storm finally broke over the city, 3 decisions were made simultaneously in that house. Arthur decided to find his lost brother. Peter dreamed of a real family, and Fiona quietly planned how to prevent the secrets of the past from destroying her comfortable present. The sun had barely risen when Arthur finished packing. 3 days had passed since the discovery of Beatrice's letter, 3 days of silent tension in the Upper East Side mansion. Fiona alternated between fits of rage and attempts at reconciliation, oscillating like a pendulum between veiled threats and promises of change. "You can't just leave like this because of a letter written 2 years ago," she raged, watching Arthur sort documents in his office. "What if this man is an imposter? What if it's all an invention of that housekeeper of yours who has always hated me? The documents are legitimate, Fiona. Beatrice was meticulous. Besides," Arthur faced his wife firmly, "Nancy has never given me a reason to doubt her loyalty in 20 years of service. You, on the other hand, have lied about how you treat my son in just 6 months of marriage." Fiona's face hardened. "You're choosing to believe a spoiled boy and a jealous maid over your own wife?" "I'm choosing to see the truth finally." Arthur closed the folder of documents. "Peter and I are going to New Orleans today. Nancy will accompany us to help with his needs. You can stay here and reflect on the future of this marriage." "Future?" Fiona's laugh sounded bitter. "What future will we have after you find this supposed abandoned brother? A doctor from the slums who probably just wants a piece of the Vance fortune." Arthur felt a wave of anger rise up, but he contained it. "That's the difference between us, Fiona. For you, everything is about money and status. For Matthew, from what I've discovered in the last few days, life is about helping people, even after being abandoned by his own family." Upstairs, Peter watched from the window as Robert put the suitcases in the car. The boy had barely slept, excited at the prospect of meeting his doctor uncle and the cousin who also used a wheelchair. For the first time since the accident, he felt less alone in his condition. "Are you all set, young Peter?" Nancy entered the room carrying a backpack with medications and essential items for the trip. "Do you think they'll like us, Mrs. Olson?" Peter's voice revealed a rare insecurity in a boy usually so resilient. The housekeeper sat on the edge of the bed, affectionately straightening the collar of the boy's shirt. "Your uncle has waited his whole life for this moment, Peter, and your cousin Sophia is your age. I'm sure you'll get along wonderfully." "Fiona said they probably just want Dad's money," the boy frowned. "That poor people always want to take advantage," Nancy sighed. "Your father has verified everything in the last few days. Dr. Matthew had several opportunities to work in luxury hospitals, but he chose to stay at the community clinic he founded. People like that don't care about money, Peter. They care about purpose." Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Fiona was making a furtive phone call. "I need you to investigate everything about a Dr. Matthew Vance in New Orleans, a rehabilitation clinic in a poor neighborhood. Find anything that could compromise him, anything." She paused, listening to the reply. "The price doesn't matter. I have access to my husband's accounts. Just do it quickly." As she hung up, she found Arthur standing at the door, watching her with an impenetrable expression. "Are your bags packed?" he asked coldly. "My bags? I thought you made it clear I was staying." "I changed my mind. I'd rather you come with us." Fiona couldn't hide her surprise. "I thought you wanted to get away from me." "On the contrary, I want you to meet my brother. I want you to see with your own eyes the man who dedicated his life to helping children with disabilities, even after being abandoned by his own family." Maybe you'll learn something about compassion." Fiona's eyes narrowed. "Are you giving me moral lessons now, Arthur? You who barely saw your own son before I came into this house?" The blow hit Arthur hard. There was truth in those words, however painful. "Yes, Fiona, I've made many mistakes. I buried myself in work after losing Beatrice, left Peter in the care of others. But unlike you, I'm willing to admit my mistakes and correct them." He walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Peter used to play. "You have 1 hour to pack your things. We leave for the airport at noon." In the early afternoon, the Vance family's private jet took off from LaGuardia Airport, bound for New Orleans. The atmosphere inside the aircraft reflected the tensions of the past few days. Arthur focused on documents about his brother's clinic, Peter anxiously flipping through an old photo album found in Beatrice's box, Nancy silently vigilant, and Fiona isolated, pretending to sleep while planning how to get out of this situation with the maximum possible advantage. "Dad, look at this picture." Peter held out a faded photo where 2 boys were playing with a dog. "Is that you and Uncle Matthew?" Arthur took the photograph, a lump forming in his throat. "Yes, that was Rex, our mutt. Matthew found him abandoned on the street and begged us to keep him." A sad smile formed on his lips. "Our father didn't want him, but Matthew cried so much that he finally gave in. My brother always had a huge heart." "How can you remember so many details after all this time?" Fiona questioned, abandoning her pretense of sleeping. "Because they're important memories, Fiona." Arthur returned the photo to his son. "When we were kids in Newark before my father founded the construction company, we were a simple but happy family. Matthew was my best friend even though he was 3 years younger." "And what happened after that?" Peter asked, genuinely, interested in the family history he had never fully known. Arthur hesitated, the memories returning in confusing fragments. "I remember that suddenly my parents started acting strangely with Matthew. My mother, especially, was frustrated with his difficulties in school. He would mix up letters, had trouble reading." Arthur frowned. "Today we know it was dyslexia, but back then, in the early 80s, it was seen as stupidity or laziness." "And when he disappeared?" Peter's voice was almost a whisper. "It was shortly after my father got his first big contract with the city of Newark. I remember we were preparing how to move to a better house." Arthur closed his eyes, forcing the memories. "One night I heard my parents arguing. My mother was saying that Matthew would be a hindrance to the family's future, that he would embarrass the Vances in the social circles they were about to enter." "That's horrible," exclaimed Peter, genuinely shocked. "The next morning Matthew was gone. My parents told me he had gone to live with relatives in the country, where he would receive special education." Arthur opened his eyes, staring at the horizon through the plane's window. "I believed them. Or maybe I chose to believe them because the alternative was unbearable." "And you never had contact with him again?" Nancy asked gently. "For the first few months I asked to talk to him on the phone. My mother always made up excuses. The relatives are traveling. The farm doesn't have a working phone. Over time, I stopped asking. We were children, Nancy. Children accept the world that adults create for them." Fiona observed the interaction with a calculated expression. Every new piece of information was a piece of the puzzle she needed to solve to maintain her lifestyle. 2 hours later, they landed at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport. The humid heat of the South greeted them as they deplaned. An executive car was waiting for them on the tarmac. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. Arthur hesitated, consulting a piece of paper with the clinic's address. The Uptown neighborhood, New Steps Rehabilitation Institute. During the drive, the urban landscape of New Orleans revealed intense contrasts. Luxurious skyscrapers next to humble communities, the old and the modern coexisting side by side. As they moved away from the center, the buildings became simpler. "This is where your brother lives," Fiona couldn't hide, her disdain as they observed the lower middle-class neighborhood. "Apparently, yes," Arthur replied dryly, more interested in his son's expressions, who was observing everything with genuine curiosity. Finally, the car stopped in front of a simple but well-maintained building. A modest sign identified the place. New Steps Institute, motor and neurological rehabilitation. "We're here," Arthur announced, feeling his heart race. 30 years of separation were about to end. While Robert and the driver prepared the wheelchair for Peter, a teenage girl in her own wheelchair appeared at the institute's entrance. She was about 14, with curly hair tied back in a ponytail and a welcoming smile. "Hi, you must be the Vances from New York, right? I'm Sophia. My dad is just finishing up with a patient, but he'll be right out to greet you." Her eyes landed on Peter. "You must be my cousin. Wow, I'm finally meeting family other than my dad." The girl's sincere enthusiasm instantly broke the tension. Peter smiled shyly as he was placed in his chair. "Hi, I'm Peter. I also just found out I have a cousin." Sophia skillfully approached, maneuvering her chair with impressive dexterity. "Is your chair electric? That's so cool. Mine's manual because I prefer to exercise my arms. Dad says it's good for circulation and muscles. He knows all about this stuff. He's been working with people with reduced mobility for years." As the teenagers began an animated conversation, Arthur remained frozen at the entrance, his eyes fixed on the door that separated the present from the past, the businessman from the boy who, decades ago, had lost his younger brother. "Come on, Peter," called Sophia, already leading her cousin inside. "I'll show you the institute while Dad finishes up. We even have a pool for hydrotherapy." Arthur watched, his son move away, chatting excitedly with the niece he had just met. A strange sense of belonging washed over him, as if somehow the children instinctively knew how to rebuild the bridges that the adults had destroyed. And then the inner door opened. A middle-aged man, a white coat over a simple shirt graying at the temples, and with the unmistakable Vance eyes, appeared in the hallway. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Arthur," the hoarse, hesitant voice carried 30 years of waiting. "Matthew." It was all Arthur could say before tears blurred his vision. At that moment, as the brothers were reunited after decades of forced separation, Fiona watched the scene with a mixture of contempt and concern. Her phone vibrated discreetly in her pocket. The private investigator had already begun his investigation into Dr. Matthew Vance. What none of them could have predicted was that this reunion would forever change the destiny of the Vances, revealing that true family ties go far beyond blood. They are made of choices, forgiveness, and above all, genuine love. The embrace between the Vance brothers seemed to contain 3 decades of absence. Arthur, always composed and rational, felt his emotional barriers crumble in the presence of his younger brother. Matthew, for his part, had teary eyes as he patted his brother's back awkwardly. "I never thought this day would come," Matthew murmured as they separated. His eyes, identical to Arthur's, examined his brother as if trying to reclaim lost time through his gaze. "You look just like our father." "And you, like our mother," Arthur replied, noticing the resemblances that had persisted despite the separation. "Though you have Grandma Teresa's smile. You still remember her?" "How could I forget? She was the only one who defended you when our parents complained about your school grades." A silence heavy with memories hung between them. In the background, Fiona watched the scene with ill-disguised impatience, while Nancy kept a respectful distance, a discreet smile on her lips. "Come, let's go to my office," Matthew invited, finally noticing the others. "Sophia has probably already taken Peter to see the whole institute. That girl never stops, even in a wheelchair." Matthew's office reflected his personality, simple, functional, yet welcoming. On the walls, besides diplomas and certificates, were dozens of photos of smiling children, many in different stages of recovery, some in wheelchairs, others with walkers or crutches. "Are these your patients?" Arthur asked, looking at the images. "My extended family," Matthew corrected with a smile. "Each one of them has taught me something important." They sat in a small seating area within the office. Matthew served water in simple glasses, his slightly trembling hands betraying his nervousness. "This is my wife, Fiona," Arthur introduced, realizing he hadn't made the proper introductions at the entrance. Matthew extended his hand politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Doctor," Fiona replied with a rehearsed smile. "Arthur was quite impacted by the discovery of your whereabouts." "I Can imagine. It was a shock for me too when his first wife sought me out. Beatrice was always perceptive, Arthur commented. I still don't understand how she kept it all a secret for so long. She wanted to be sure before telling you. She investigated everything meticulously. Matthew paused. When she showed me the pictures of you with Peter, told me about the accident, I felt we needed to reunite. But then came the news of her accident. How did you know? I read it in the newspapers. I tried to go to the funeral, but Matthew shrugged. I didn't have the courage to just show up like that out of the blue at such a difficult time. I thought it might make things worse for you and Peter. At that moment, laughter echoed from the hallway. Sophia and Peter appeared at the door, both breathless, as if they had just had a wheelchair race. Dad, the Institute is amazing, Peter exclaimed, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Sophia showed me the hydrotherapy pool and the physical therapy room with all that modern equipment. There's even a robotic exoskeleton for gait training. And I told him that Uncle Matthew managed to get the equipment with an international grant, Sophia added proudly. It was the first rehabilitation center in the South to have one. Arthur watched the interaction between the cousins with a mixture of astonishment and joy. Peter, usually reserved since the accident, showed an excitement he hadn't seen in years. Can we show them the house too, Dad? Sophia asked. So Peter can see my adapted room. Of course, sweetie. In fact, I was about to invite everyone for dinner at our place. We don't want to impose, Arthur said automatically. Impose? Arthur, I've waited 30 years for this. Moment, Matthew smiled. My house is behind the Institute. It's simple but comfortable, and fully adapted for Sophia, so Peter will feel right at home. An hour later, they were all gathered at Matthew's house, a single-story, modest but cozy home with ramps and wide doorways for Sophia's wheelchair. A middle-aged woman introduced as Mrs. Josephina, a long-time cook and helper, was preparing dinner in the kitchen. So, how did you end up here? Arthur asked, as Sophia took Peter to see her room. Matthew took a deep breath, pouring himself some water. After being left at the orphanage in Newark, I spent a few years waiting for you all to come back for me. A sad smile crossed his face. Children are optimistic, aren't they? I made up excuses. Maybe you were traveling. Maybe you were building a new house with a special room for me. Maybe you were testing my courage. Arthur felt a lump in his throat. Matthew, I swear I didn't know. I know that now, Arthur. Beatrice explained everything. Matthew made a reassuring gesture. When I turned 10, I started to accept that no one was coming. A teacher at the orphanage noticed my dyslexia and started helping me with special reading techniques. She was the one who showed me that I wasn't stupid, as our parents thought. I was just different. And how did you end up in New Orleans? Nancy asked, genuinely interested. At 18, I left the orphanage. I worked as a bricklayer's assistant at first. Then I got a job as a nursing assistant in a hospital. One of the doctors noticed my interest in medicine and encouraged me to apply to college. Matthew smiled at the memory. I studied like crazy, using techniques to work around the dyslexia. I failed twice, but on the third try I got in. I graduated at 30. Why motor rehabilitation? Arthur asked, genuinely curious. During medical school, I did an internship at a hospital that treated victims of traffic accidents. I saw many children and teenagers lose their mobility and with it their hope. I identified with that feeling of abandonment, of thinking that life was over. Matthew looked out the window towards the clinic. I decided I wanted to give hope back to those people. And Sophia, how did she come into your life? Arthur's question made Matthew's eyes sparkle. Sophia was a patient. She was 5 when she came to the clinic, a victim of meningitis that affected her spinal cord. Her mother had passed away, and her absentee father ended up abandoning her completely after the illness. Matthew smiled tenderly. I oversaw her treatment for months, and when her father signed the papers relinquishing custody, I didn't think twice. I already considered her my daughter. She seems like an incredible girl, Nancy commented. She's the light of my life. And today, Matthew looked at Arthur with emotion. Today, our family has grown again. Fiona, who had remained strangely quiet, finally spoke. "A truly fascinating story, Doctor. From an abandoned orphan to a respected doctor, raising a disabled girl on your own. It sounds like something out of a soap opera." The comment landed like a bomb in the warm atmosphere. Arthur stared at his wife with indignation, while Nancy held her breath. "Fiona!" Arthur scolded. To everyone's surprise, Matthew laughed lightly. "I confess, sometimes I think so too. Life has more imagination than any screenwriter." He faced Fiona calmly. "But I don't raise Sophia on my own. I have a wonderful support network, Mrs. Josephina, my colleagues at the clinic, the community. And Sophia isn't disabled. She has a disability, but she is so much more than that. She is intelligent, determined, joyful." Just then, Peter and Sophia returned to the living room, breaking the tension. "Dad, Sophia's room has bars on all the walls, so she can transfer from her chair by herself," Peter exclaimed excitedly. "And a desk with adjustable height. Can we adapt my room like that too?" Before Arthur could answer, Fiona intervened. "Those adaptations are expensive, Peter, and unnecessary since you have Nancy to help you." An awkward silence filled the room. Sophia looked at Peter's stepmother with astonishment, while Matthew observed the family dynamic with clinical interest. "Actually," Matthew said calmly, "independence is a fundamental part of rehabilitation. The adaptations cost less than many treatments and provide dignity and self-confidence." "Sophia does almost everything by herself," Peter added admiringly. "She even taught me a technique to get from the chair to the bed without needing help." Dinner proceeded with light conversation, but the tension between Arthur and Fiona was palpable. When Mrs. Josephina brought dessert, a pecan praline that delighted Peter, Matthew finally touched on the subject that had been hanging in the air. "Arthur, about our parents. They passed away more than 10 years ago," Arthur replied. "Mom had a stroke and Dad passed away 6 months later. They never mentioned the truth about you." "I figured," Matthew nodded. "I searched for you for years. When I finally found out you were the famous businessman Arthur Vance, I thought about making contact. But I feared your reaction. I feared you knew the truth and had agreed with their decision." "I never would have agreed," Arthur's voice faltered. "But I was a coward for not questioning more, for accepting the empty excuses about your absence. We were children. Arthur, you were only 8. Matthew reached a hand across the table, touching his brother's arm. "The important thing is that we're here now." After dinner, while the children showed Nancy the adapted garden in the back, Matthew took Arthur to his personal office. "There's something I need to show you," he said, taking an old box from a shelf. "I've kept this all these years." Inside the box was a green plastic dinosaur, worn with time, with a broken leg. "My Tyrannosaurus," Arthur murmured, instantly recognizing the toy. "I gave it to you for your 5th birthday. It was the only thing I managed to bring from the orphanage when I left, my last link to you, to our old life." Arthur picked up the toy with trembling hands. Memories flooded his mind. Matthew's smile upon receiving the gift, the games inventing stories about dinosaurs, the nights reading adventure stories to his younger brother, who was still struggling to decipher the letters. "How could I have forgotten all of this?" he whispered, more to himself than to Matthew. "You didn't forget," his brother replied gently. "You just kept it in a safe place in your heart until you were ready to look at it again." At that moment, shouts from the garden interrupted their conversation. Rushing outside, they found Peter on the ground, with Sophia and Nancy by his side. "What happened?" Arthur asked, terrified. "He tried to get out of his chair by himself to feel the grass," Sophia explained, worried. "I think he lost his balance." "I'm fine, Dad," Peter assured him, though his face showed pain. "I just sprained my wrist when I fell." Matthew immediately assumed his professional demeanor, carefully examining his nephew's arm. "It doesn't look broken, but we need to get an X-ray to be sure. Let's go to the clinic." As Matthew took Peter to the institute, accompanied by Nancy and Sophia, Arthur remained on the porch, watching the starry New Orleans sky. Guilt consumed him. He had been so absorbed in the revelations about the past that he hadn't properly supervised his son. "I always knew this trip would be a disaster," Fiona commented, appearing beside him. First, we find out your family abandoned a child with problems. Now Peter gets hurt, trying to imitate his disabled cousin. Arthur turned slowly, facing his wife with a clarity he had never had before. Is that what you see, Fiona? A disabled cousin, not a brilliant independent teenager who inspires my son to overcome his limitations. What I see is Peter getting hurt because of absurd ideas about independence. He needs to accept that he'll never be like other boys. You're wrong. Arthur's voice was firm. What Peter needs to accept is that he will be different, but no less capable. And for that, he needs people who believe in him, not people who diminish him. How dare you? All I've done is try to bring him to reality. No, Fiona, all you've done is try to shape my son and my life to serve your own purposes. Arthur sighed deeply. I think I'm finally seeing clearly. This trip wasn't a disaster. It was a revelation. That night, while Peter slept in Sophia's room, his wrist bandaged but a smile on his face for having found a friend who truly understood him, Arthur made a decision that would change the course of all his relationships. Outside the house, sitting alone on a garden bench, Fiona was talking on the phone in a low voice. I need that information as soon as possible, she whispered urgently. Anything. That can discredit this miracle, Doctor. My marriage depends on it. What she didn't know was that Nancy, returning quietly after checking on Peter, heard every word, confirming her worst suspicions about her employer's true intentions. The crescent moon illuminated the New Orleans sky, a silent witness to a family slowly rebuilding itself, and a woman desperately trying to maintain control over an empire that was beginning to crumble. The morning in New Orleans dawned with a heavy sky, heralding a storm. In the small house attached to the New Steps Institute, the atmosphere was no different. Arthur had spent a sleepless night, mulling over memories and decisions, while Fiona slept in the guest room, isolated by her own choice. How's the wrist, son? Arthur asked, finding Peter in the kitchen, where Sophia was preparing a typical southern breakfast with the help of Mrs. Josephina. It barely hurts anymore, the boy replied cheerfully. Uncle Matthew said it was just a mild sprain. And look, Sophia taught me how to make beignets. Arthur watched in amazement as his son handled the dough, sitting in his wheelchair adapted to the height of the stove. A kind of independence he had never considered possible. The secret is to adapt the environment, not the person, Sophia explained, noticing her uncle's surprised look. Dad always says that. Sophia's right, Matthew agreed, entering the kitchen. Most limitations aren't in the disability, but in the world we've built by ignoring human diversity. Arthur nodded, a lump in his throat. How many opportunities had Peter missed because he, as a father, hadn't seen beyond the wheelchair? We have a full day ahead, Matthew continued, pouring himself coffee. I was thinking of showing you the Institute's expansion project. We're raising funds to build an adapted sports center. That sounds incredible, Arthur replied. Actually, I'd like to get to know your work better. Maybe we could collaborate in some way. Matthew's eyes lit up at the possibility. That would be extraordinary. There are so many children on the waiting list for care. Fiona appeared at the kitchen door, impeccably dressed and made up despite the early hour. Good morning, everyone, she greeted with an artificial smile. Arthur, can we talk in private before any plans are made? Reluctantly, Arthur followed his wife into the garden. The sky was growing darker, and distant thunder announced the imminent arrival of rain. We need to go back to New York today, Fiona declared bluntly. Your company has that meeting with the Chinese investors tomorrow, remember? You can't just abandon your business for this family reunion. The meeting can be handled by Michael. That's why I have a vice president. And what about the foundation's charity dinner? We committed to being there, Arthur. These are important people, essential contacts for your projects. Arthur studied the face of the woman he had chosen to be his wife after losing Beatrice. How could he have been so blind? It's interesting how you always remember the social and business commitments, Fiona, but never my son's emotional needs. Don't be unfair. I'm just thinking about your assets, about Peter's future. You've worked your whole life to build the Vance empire. An empire, Arthur repeated thoughtfully. Do you know the cost of that empire, Fiona? My parents abandoned a son because he didn't fit the perfect image they wanted to project. I lost 30 years of my brother's life, and I almost lost my son's childhood, buried in meetings and business trips. Fiona realized she needed to change her strategy. Her voice took on a softer tone. Darling, I understand. Your emotion right now. It's natural to feel guilty, but we can't make rash decisions based on guilt or emotion. She touched his arm gently. Let's go home. Process all of this calmly. Then we can come back, maybe invite your brother and niece to visit us in New York. For a moment, Arthur almost gave in to the appeal of practical reason that had always guided his life. But then he remembered the toy dinosaur Matthew had kept for decades, the expression on Peter's face as he made beignets with Sophia, the embrace of the brother who had waited 30 years. No, Fiona, we're staying a few more days. His voice was soft but resolute. You can go back if you want. I'll send the jet to pick you up. Before she could respond, Arthur's cell phone rang. It was Robert, the butler, calling from New York. Mr. Vance, forgive me for bothering you, but there was a strange situation at the mansion. A man came asking about Dr. Matthew Vance. He said he was doing research for a medical journal, but he asked very specific questions about his past and about you. Arthur frowned. How did he know? Matthew is my brother. We haven't disclosed that. I don't know, sir, but he left a card. He's a private investigator, not a journalist. Arthur felt his blood run cold. He turned slowly to Fiona, who turned pale as she realized she had been discovered. Thank you, Robert. I'll call later. He hung up the phone, staring at his wife. You hired an investigator to dig up information on my brother. Arthur, I can explain. Explain what exactly? That you're looking for something to discredit Matthew, to push Peter away from him, to keep your lifestyle intact. You're being irrational. You barely know this man. What if he's lying? What if he's an imposter? You have a fortune, Arthur. People would do anything to— Stop! Arthur's voice thundered, silencing her. Look into his eyes, Fiona. Look and tell me you don't see my father reflected there, that you don't notice the same gestures, the same tone of voice. Matthew is my brother. The proof isn't in DNA. It's in every shared memory, in every word spoken. A bolt of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. The first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and relentless. You're going to lose everything because of this family fantasy, Fiona threatened, her mask of sweetness completely gone. You're going to throw away years of hard work to bankroll your little rejected brother's charity institute. Something snapped inside Arthur. All the doubts and hesitations of the past few days dissipated like mist in the strong sun. Do you know the difference between you and Matthew, Fiona? He turned his rejection into strength to help others. You turned my pain into an opportunity to take advantage. The rain was now pouring down, drenching them both in seconds. Fiona tried. One last gambit. Think about Peter. He needs stability, a family. Exactly. And that's what I'm giving him now. A real family, based on love and acceptance, not on appearances and convenience. On the porch of the house, Matthew watched the argument from a distance, sheltered from the rain. Beside him, Nancy held a tray of coffee she had intended to serve in the garden before the storm. Should I intervene? Matthew asked, concerned. No, Doctor. Some storms need to happen to clear the air. Nancy's wisdom, built on decades of silent observation, rarely failed. Your brother is finally finding his voice. In the kitchen, Peter and Sophia watched the rain from the window, unaware of the drama unfolding in the garden. Did your mum like the rain? Sophia asked as she shaped another beignet. She loved it. She said it was the sky washing away the world's sorrows. Peter smiled at the memory. We always made hot chocolate on stormy days. We can make some too. Mrs. Josephina has cocoa powder in the pantry. While the teenagers ventured into cooking, the argument in the garden reached its peak. I'm leaving today, Fiona declared, trembling with anger in the rain. I hope you don't regret this madness, Arthur. The madness was marrying someone who sees my son as a burden and my brother as a threat. Arthur spoke with a calmness that surprised even himself. The jet is at your disposal. I'll send your bags later. You can't be serious. 2 years of marriage thrown away because of 2 years of lies, Fiona. Of pretending to care about Peter while despising him behind my back. Of using my guilt and loneliness for your benefit. It's over. A flash of fury crossed Fiona's perfectly made-up face. You'll regret this. I have rights, as your wife. We have a prenuptial agreement that's very clear about that, but don't worry, I'll be generous as long as you stay away from my family. Fiona spun on her heel, storming into the house like a hurricane. She passed through the kitchen without looking at Peter and Sophia, heading straight to her room to pack. Matthew approached his brother, offering a towel. Are you okay? Arthur accepted the towel, drying his soaked face. For the first time in a long time, I think I am. In the kitchen, Nancy found the teenagers making hot chocolate. Mrs. Olson, Peter called, worried. Fiona seems furious. What happened? The housekeeper chose her words carefully. Your father and she had a disagreement, Peter. I think she'll be going back to New York today. And us? Fear was evident in the boy's eyes. We'll stay a few more days, Arthur replied, entering the kitchen drenched. If your uncle and cousin don't mind our company. Peter's face lit up instantly. Really, Dad? Really? We have a lot of time to make up for. A lot of stories to learn. Sophia clapped her hands enthusiastically. This is amazing. We can take Peter to the Adapted surfing project at Grand Isle, Dad, and to the Institute's children's choir performance. Matthew smiled, watching his daughter's enthusiasm. That sounds like an excellent plan. 2 hours later, the Vance's private jet took off from New Orleans Airport, carrying only Fiona back to New York. In the back seat of the empty aircraft, she typed furiously on her cell phone, contacting lawyers and planning her next move. She would not let the Vance fortune slip away without a fight. At Matthew's house, the storm finally subsided. Arthur found his brother in his office, reviewing patient files. Can we talk? For a minute. Matthew indicated the chair in front of him. Of course, is everything all right? Actually, I have a proposal for you. Arthur sat down, organizing his thoughts. Your work here is incredible, Matthew, but you're limited by resources, space, equipment. We do what we can with what we have. Matthew smiled. I learned not to dream too big. Maybe it's time to change that. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes shining with a renewed purpose. I'm thinking of creating a foundation, something substantial with enough resources to expand your institute, build others across the country. Matthew blinked, surprised. Arthur, that would cost millions. I have millions. I built an empire, remember? Maybe it's time to use it for something that really matters. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider being the medical director of the New Steps Foundation. Arthur smiled. I want to use Vance Construction's expertise to create truly inclusive spaces. Hospitals, schools, public areas, all designed with human diversity in mind, as you always say. It's an ambitious project. I was also thinking, Arthur hesitated, maybe you and Sophia could consider moving to New York, not immediately, of course, but eventually. We could establish the Foundation's headquarters there, and Peter would be so happy to have you nearby. Matthew watched his brother for a long moment. Is this about your separation? I don't want you to make rash decisions based on the emotion of the moment, Arthur. No, Matthew. The truth is I've been questioning the meaning of my life for years. Since I lost Beatrice, since Peter's accident. I've built buildings all over New York, but what has been the real impact of that? Creating spaces that truly transform lives, that would be a legacy worth leaving. In the garden, now bathed in the sun that shone again after the storm, Peter and Sophia were excitedly planning the next few days. And then we can visit the adapted bocce ball project, Sophia suggested. It's super fun. I've never played bocce, Peter admitted. I'll teach you. It's all about strategy and precision, not strength. I'm the regional champion, you know. The pride in his cousin's voice made Peter smile. He had never considered that sports could still be a part of his life. Nancy watched the teenagers from a distance, her heart overflowing with joy to see Peter so animated. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Robert informing her that Fiona had arrived in New York and had ordered all staff to pack her things to be removed from the mansion. The New York storm has just begun, Nancy murmured to herself, but without real concern. For the first time since the accident, she felt that the Vance family was on the right path, even if that path was full of obstacles. In the office, the Vance brothers continued their conversation, rebuilding bridges and planning a future that neither of them could have imagined just a week before. "There's something else I need to confess," Arthur said, hesitantly. "All these years I've had recurring dreams. I would dream of you as a child crying, calling for me. I would wake up distressed, not understanding why." "The mind has mysterious ways of preserving what the heart doesn't want to forget," Matthew replied. "I promise we'll never be separated again," Arthur declared, his voice choked with emotion. "Whatever Fiona tries to do, whatever obstacles arise, we are a family now." "We are a family," Matthew agreed. "We always were. We were just temporarily separated." Outside, the New Orleans sky was once again a deep blue, as if the storm had been just a necessary interlude to clear the air and allow for a new beginning, just like the emotional storm that had just passed through the Vance family. But while a new chapter was beginning in New Orleans, in New York, Fiona was walking into the office of one of the city's most ruthless lawyers, determined to secure her share of the empire she believed she had helped maintain. The battle was just beginning. A year passed since that storm in New Orleans, profoundly transforming the lives of the Vance family. The old mansion on the Upper East Side had been sold, replaced by a new residence in Brooklyn Heights, a spacious, modern and fully adapted home with accessible gardens and automation technology that allowed Peter to control his environment independently. In Midtown Manhattan, an imposing building bore a newly inaugurated sign, "New Steps Foundation, Center for Rehabilitation and Inclusion." It was a sunny Sunday morning, and a small crowd was gathering for the official inauguration ceremony. "Nervous?" asked Matthew, adjusting his brother's tie as they waited backstage in the auditorium. "A little," Arthur admitted, peeking through a gap in the curtain at the hundreds of people filling the space: doctors, therapists, patients, families, officials, and the press. "I've never liked public speaking." "Funny," Matthew teased. "You, who commanded meetings with dozens of foreign investors." "That was different. That was just business." Arthur smiled. "This is personal." In the makeshift dressing room next door, Sophia was helping Peter fix his hair. At 13, the boy had grown several inches in the last year. His face, once always marked by a shadow of sadness, now displayed the confidence typical of a teenager, beginning to find his place in the world. "Ready for the big speech, cousin?" asked Sophia, who at 15 already showed the elegance and determination that would make her a leader in the future. "I think so." Peter adjusted his position in the motorized wheelchair, a birthday gift from his father and uncle. "I still can't believe I'm going to speak in front of so many people." "You're going to kill it." Sophia squeezed her cousin's shoulder encouragingly. "Just remember what we practiced." Nancy entered the dressing room, now wearing the official foundation uniform, a far cry from her old housekeeper's apron. As the family outreach coordinator, her role was crucial in helping families transition to their new reality after a disability diagnosis. "It's time, kids," she announced with an affectionate smile. "The ceremony is about to begin." In the auditorium, the lights dimmed and an institutional video began playing on the giant screen. Images of the small clinic in New Orleans gradually transformed into the imposing structure of the new center in New York, a visual metaphor for the Vance family's journey. Among the audience, familiar and unfamiliar faces shared the same anticipation. In the front row, Mrs. Josephina, who had moved to New York with Matthew and Sophia, was wiping away tears of emotion. Beside her, Robert, the faithful butler, now retired but still part of the family, smiled discreetly. Arthur took the stage to warm applause. Adjusting the microphone, he took a deep breath before beginning his speech. "Good morning, everyone. It is with deep emotion that we officially inaugurate the New Steps Foundation." His voice, normally firm in multi-million-dollar negotiations, trembled slightly. "This institution is born from a personal story of loss, reunion, and above all, love." In the middle rows, an elegant woman watched with an indecipherable expression. Fiona Vance, or rather Fiona Cardoso after the divorce, had been invited to the ceremony to the surprise of many. The separation process had been less tumultuous than expected. After an initial threat of a legal battle, she had accepted a generous but significantly smaller settlement than she had hoped for when Arthur threatened to publicly expose her treatment of Peter. Many of you know the story of Vance Construction, a company founded by my father 4 decades ago, Arthur continued. We built skyscrapers, shopping malls, luxury condominiums. But today, I realize that, despite all the concrete and steel we've erected, we never truly concerned ourselves with building spaces for everyone. He paused, seeking his brother's gaze in the front row. It took my son Peter having an accident and losing the use of his legs for me to begin to see the invisible barriers we create in our society. It took reuniting with my brother Matthew after 30 years of unjust separation to understand that our deepest limitations are not in our bodies, but in the prejudices we carry. On the screen, images of Peter and Sophia practicing adapted sports alternated with photos of the center's construction, showing the project's evolution. The New Steps Foundation is born with a clear purpose: to turn limitations into possibilities. It's not just about physical rehabilitation, but about rebuilding self-esteem, independence, and dignity. And above all, it's about redesigning spaces, physical and social, to include human diversity in all its fullness. Arthur then explained the structure of the new foundation. The main center in New York with wings for motor, cognitive and sensory rehabilitation, adapted sports programs, a research and development hub for assistive technologies, a training school for professionals, and an ambitious plan to expand to other major American cities in the next 5 years. But perhaps the most innovative aspect is our inclusive architecture division, he highlighted with evident pride. Vance Construction will no longer build a single building that is not fully accessible, and we will offer free consulting to companies and public agencies that wish to adapt their spaces. After nearly 20 minutes, Arthur prepared for the most important moment of the ceremony. Now I would like to call to the stage the 2 people who are the true inspiration behind this project, my son Peter and my brother, Dr. Matthew Vance. To enthusiastic applause, Matthew came on stage, pushing Peter's wheelchair. The boy looked nervous but determined. Sophia in the wings gave him a thumbs up. Matthew spoke first, describing his journey from the small institute in New Orleans to the medical directorship of the new foundation. With characteristic humility, he stressed that the credit was not his, but belonged to the patients who never gave up, even in the face of the greatest obstacles. I have learned more from my patients than I have ever taught, he confessed emotionally. And perhaps the most important lesson came from my daughter Sophia, who showed me that wheelchairs don't prevent you from soaring high. When it was Peter's turn to speak, an expectant silence fell over the auditorium. The teenager adjusted the microphone, and in a voice that was initially shaky but gained firmness, he shared his experience. Before the accident, I was just an ordinary boy who loved baseball. Afterwards, I thought my life was over. I spent months asking myself, why me? Peter paused, scanning the audience. Today I understand that was the wrong question. The right question is, for what purpose? What is this experience for? What can I do with it? His eyes met Fiona's in the audience. There was no anger or resentment, just a serenity surprising for someone so young. On the most difficult path of my life, I lost some people, but I also gained others. I discovered an incredible uncle and a cousin who became my best friend. I realized that my father, despite all his flaws, has a huge heart. And most importantly, I discovered that we all have limitations. Some are just more visible than others. Arthur couldn't hold back his tears as he listened to his son speak with such maturity. Beside him, Matthew discreetly squeezed his shoulder in silent support. This foundation isn't about overcoming disability in the sense of conquering it, Peter continued, surprising everyone with his eloquence. It's about creating a world where having a disability doesn't mean being less. It just means being different. And we are all different. After the emotional speeches, the ceremony continued with a performance by the inclusive choir, children and teenagers with various disabilities singing "What a Wonderful World," drawing more tears and applause. At the reception that followed, Arthur was approached by Fiona, who had kept her distance in recent months. "It's impressive what you've built here," she commented, holding a glass of champagne. "I never imagined you'd abandon skyscrapers for rehabilitation centers." "People change, Fiona," Arthur replied serenely. "Sometimes we need to lose something to find our true purpose. Peter is different." She observed her former stepson from a distance, laughing with Sophia and a group of teenagers, some in wheelchairs, others with different assistive devices. More happy. He's found his place, and people who accept him exactly as he is. Fiona nodded thoughtfully. "I never knew how to handle his situation. Maybe I was cruel out of fear and ignorance." The admission surprised Arthur. "We all make mistakes, Fiona. Some bigger than others," she sighed. "I'm moving to Paris next week. I received an offer to run the branch of a fashion magazine. I'm happy for you, truly. Before I go," Fiona hesitated, "I'd like to speak with Peter, to apologize. Do you think he would talk to me?" Arthur looked at his son, now proudly showing off the controls of his motorized chair to his friends. "I think so. Peter has a bigger heart than all of us." On the other side of the room, Nancy watched the interaction with interest. Beside her, Mrs. Josephina commented on the changes of the past year. "If someone had told me I'd be living in New York at 65, I would have laughed." "In their face," the Southern woman confided. "But here I am working at a fancy foundation and seeing Sophia blossom like never before." "Life surprises us," Nancy agreed. "When Mrs. Beatrice handed me that letter, I never imagined it would lead to all of this." Her eyes fell on Matthew, who was chatting animatedly with a group of doctors. The man who had been abandoned in childhood was now leading an institution that would transform thousands of lives. At the end of the afternoon, as the guests began to disperse, the Vance family gathered for an official photo in front of the panel with the foundation's logo, a stylized figure taking a step forward, representing continuous progress, even in the face of obstacles. "I think Mom would be proud," Peter commented, as they positioned themselves for the photograph. "I'm sure she would," Arthur replied, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "In fact, she's the one who made all of this possible." Matthew smiled in agreement. Beatrice saw beyond appearances. She saw the truth when everyone else preferred the comfort of lies. "Just like Mrs. Olson," Sophia added, pulling the housekeeper into the photo. "Don't you think she should be in the family picture too?" "Without a doubt," Arthur agreed. "Nancy is as much family as any of us." As the photographer prepared his equipment, Arthur reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The pain of the past hadn't completely disappeared. Some scars never fully fade. But now it served a greater purpose, transformed into fuel for positive change. "Everyone together," the photographer instructed. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. The flash captured the moment. Not just 4 smiling people, but a new concept of family, rebuilt on foundations of acceptance, respect, and unconditional love. In the week following the inauguration, Arthur found Peter in the adapted garden of their new home, practicing basketball shots at a hoop specially installed for his height. The boy had developed a passion for the sport after participating in a workshop with Paralympic athletes. "You're getting good at this," he complimented, watching his son make 3 consecutive shots. Peter smiled, proud. "Sophia says I have the potential to compete, maybe in the 2032 Paralympics." Arthur sat on the bench near the court. "I have a surprise for you." "What?" The boy's eyes lit up with anticipation. "Remember how you always wanted to visit the Jersey Shore? But we never went because we thought it would be difficult with the chair." Peter nodded, a shadow of disappointment crossing his face as he remembered the various trips cancelled after the accident. "Well, the Foundation is launching a pilot program for accessible beaches," Arthur smiled. "And guess which will be the first beach to receive special walkways, amphibious chairs, and adapted surfing instructors? The Jersey Shore? Seriously?" Peter's excitement was contagious. "We're going next weekend, Matthew, Sophia, and the whole team. It will be the official test before opening to the public." Peter propelled his chair closer to his father, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Dad." for everything. That night, after Peter had fallen asleep, Arthur found Matthew in the Home Office, reviewing projects for the Foundation's expansion. "I never thought I'd see myself working late on social projects instead of multi-million-dollar contracts," he commented, pouring himself a coffee. Matthew smiled, taking off his reading glasses. "Regrets?" "Not for a second." Arthur sat across from his brother. "Do you know what Peter told me today? That for the first time since the accident, he no longer feels like the boy in the wheelchair. He's just Peter, who plays basketball, who has friends, who dreams of the Paralympics. That's more valuable than any empire, isn't it? Infinitely more." Arthur paused, contemplating the family portrait on the desk, a recent photo with everyone smiling in the garden of the new house. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to reduce my role at the construction company even further. Maybe sell most of my shares and focus entirely on the foundation." "Are you sure? The company is our father's legacy." "Exactly." Arthur faced his brother. "And what was that legacy? Inaccessible buildings, families destroyed in the name of appearances, distorted values. I want to leave a different legacy, Matthew, one that Peter can truly be proud to continue one day." 3 months later, the cover of the country's most respected business magazine featured a photo of the Vance brothers, with the headline, "From Construction to Foundation, How the Vance Family is Redefining Inclusion in America." The article highlighted not only the success of the New Steps Foundation, but also Arthur's revolutionary decision to convert 70% of the construction company's assets into a perpetual trust to ensure the foundation's sustainability for generations to come. At the new foundation headquarters, now fully operational, a discreet plaque at the entrance to the main auditorium bore an inscription that summarized the institution's philosophy. "For Beatrice Vance, who saw beyond appearances and taught us that true family is born from love, not blood." And so, from the wreckage of a family torn apart by prejudice and lies, was born not just a new family structure, but an institution that would transform the lives of thousands of Americans, proving that even stories that begin with abandonment can end with acceptance, and that a person's true worth can never be measured by their limitations, but by their capacity to love and be loved. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Arthur, Peter, Matthew, and Sophia has touched your hearts. To continue exploring emotional stories that reveal the true essence of family relationships, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking the link on the left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day, we bring you new stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the beauty of overcoming adversity. What did you think of this journey of family rediscovery? Share your impressions in the comments. We are eager to read your reflections and find out which characters touched your hearts the most.